Filmed before a live studio audience.
Hello lovelies, today we're going to take a look at Riftbreakers, which is the last of the books that I got from Alex T and Blackoath. Though, given the man's Asimovian profligacy in his production, there's probably 6 more games he's come out with while I've been reviewing these. But anyway, yet again, this is mostly a single player or 1 GM and 1 player game, but the rules are expansive enough to do more conventional group gaming with, and in this instance it is more angled to that as a viable playstyle than a lot of his other work. This is very much a tabletop version or vision of an MMORPG with a lot of stuff that will be quite familiar to MMO players. Excuse me. This is a daring move, given that the great downfall of 4th edition D&D was pursuing the same thing. System-wise, this is a mix of familiar OSR type elements and D100 based resolution. So much like some of Alex's other games that I've reviewed, it bears comparison with basic role-playing or RuneQuest as well. So you have your stat rolls, which are 3d6 scale, but you roll against them on the D100 after they've been converted into percentages. You have skill rolls that are done against the D100, and you have various other aspects to your character, such as talents that you can use at will, powers that can be used once per encounter, and primes that can only be used once per day, all of which will be incredibly familiar to anybody who encountered 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's far from the most offensive part of D&D 4th edition, but you can certainly see the influence and the lineage there. So besides stats and skills, you have these special abilities, these talents, powers and primes, which are derived from the closest thing you get to classes, really, which are called hearts. You can have a number of different hearts, and each one gives you mastery over a certain different area. So the base starter ones are Arcane, Might, Restoration, or Shadow, which you could broadly correlate to Mage, Fighter, Cleric, or Rogue. And there are other hearts as well, so you create a combination of hearts that suits your style of play and your desire of what powers and so on you might have access to, and you go from there. So it's a bit like the similar mechanics in Teknoaxe, which I reviewed yesterday. So yeah, with a combination of all these things, there aren't classes exactly, but you can kind of channel your character towards particular outcomes upon which you want to focus. Character creation itself takes the form of a sort of mini game, like the sort of introductory section of an MMO, in which you gradually build your character up, face challenges to help you learn the system, and then you emerge from a sort of dungeon labyrinth into the world of the game as a semi-blank slate, a stranger as they're called, like many other people who seem to have washed up in this world and this dimension from other worlds and other dimensions. The rules themselves are broadly similar to Teknoaxe, but without the damage conversion. They cover all the usual things that you might expect from a game system. Armor reduces damage rather than making you harder to hit, but the armor itself can degrade, and so on. But otherwise it's largely familiar. It just uses percentile rolls. So the role you play in the game is that of a hero who enters these rifts that open up to other worlds and unleash monsters and other nastiness on this sort of prime material plane that you're on. in a similar way to the way in which you seem to have washed up on this world. So, besides normal adventuring stuff, you can also quest into rifts, destroy the Rift Lord at the other end, close the rift, grab some treasure, and return. And that is the main focus of the game. So Alex wears his influences on his sleeve, as always, and this whole setup is very reminiscent of both the game Rift, that was sued by Palladium, as you may recall, and also the game Defiance. Both of those games using similar mechanics, both of those games MMOs published by Trion. So very similar. I still kind of miss Defiance. It was a bold idea, a sci-fi series that was transmedia, and so you would have the TV series and you would have the game and you would have other material tying into it, but unfortunately it was not to be. What I miss most of all, of course, is a mostly naked Jamie Murray. Jamie Murray. Gameplay largely takes place by stringing together gameplay procedures as you play. So, the usual kind of stuff you do in games: traveling, questing, crafting, hiring goons, and so on. And there's robust rules for all of these, plenty of gear and loot, a basic primer on the world and the city in which you start, and a pretty decent bestiary, which has often been my complaint about a lot of these single player games, is that they need a bigger bestiary. You don't really have creature generation rules here, but with 80 entries in a bestiary, I've seen worse. So this whole game is probably the closest that we have to a conventional RPG from Alex, and even then it's still fairly single player focused, and it's opened up enough that you could bring in some of Alex's more typical weirdness to the setting, should you so wish, or even cross it over with his other games given the nature of the rifts. Compared to his other fare, however, this does feel a little bit staid and conventional, without the same level of creative flair and as his other books, either in presentation or in content. But then, a lot of people don't seem to want to experience anything different, fresh, or challenging. D&D remains the most popular game in its most asinine and safe form. So what do I know? I'm a game connoisseur, if you will. My taste is not the public taste. Just as most people would turn up their nose at a posh restaurant at Lavender Air and all that kind of nonsense. So the old stuff doesn't thrill me the way it used to, I suppose. So maybe I'm a touch too cynical for this type of presentation, this type of game. So style-wise, I'd give it a solid 3. It's a robust implementation of Alex's typical game system ideas and themes, but the book itself is a semi-regular fantasy set of tropes that just aren't different enough to particularly engage or excite me. But that's mostly my problem, but you're here for my opinion, so there it is. Substance wise, I would give this a 4. This has a much more solid set of systems and a lot more adaptability than some of the other recent work that I have reviewed, as a decent bestiary. Though, yet again, I would prefer some sort of semi-random monster generation rules. That's become my common refrain for most single-player games. It's just a set bestiary, and set descriptions are always going to run out or become overly familiar, and more rapidly than you think. You cannot provide enough tables or enough examples of monsters to overcome that. It's a limitation of the medium, I think. whereas generation rules are far more adaptable and you can have far more potential outcomes. Your mileage may vary, but that's my interpretation. But if your taste runs more towards something conventional, to fantasy standards or to MMOs, then this might suit you more if you're looking for that kind of experience at the table, as a single or low number of players sort of game. For my part, all these years after 4th edition, I'm still not convinced that emulating MMOs is a terribly good idea, and I think that MMO model has unfortunately spread to all other forms of gaming, so pretty much anything you point at has some aspects of games as service. And MMOs, with their programming and so on, they can deal with complexity and incremental changes in statistics and so on much better than a tabletop game can. So they can allow for very complicated rules and optimized builds, because all of that fades into the background while you're actually playing, and their content can afford to be repetitive. TTRPGs are different and have different strengths and weaknesses. The adaptability, the scope, the ability to do anything within the bounds of plausible reality within the game. It's very difficult for an MMO to emulate, or any computer game, to emulate what you get from tabletop RPGs, and it is very hard for tabletop RPGs to replicate the relative strengths of role-playing games. So either one trying to copy the other is necessarily weakening the things that make it good in the first place, and I don't think, unfortunately, this is any different. It might be fun to write a game that simultaneously takes place in the real world and the MMO game world, as has been explored in some animes and so on, and crossing between the two, and maybe there's something weird and mystical about the MMO that crosses over into the real world, or vice versa. There's some solid bones here for doing something like that, but it's not what it actually does. But it would provide a toolkit for doing something like that yourself. I haven't seen any games that do that, and I would do it, but I have too much else on my plate. So there you go. Zang.
Ars Goetia presents classical demonology for OSR games. If you like your magic to have a little authenticity, if not reality, then Ars Goetia will give you all the tools necessary to bring classical ritual magicians and demonologists into your OSR games.